what the plan is as far as there is a rough division of labor. The United States is going after all of the air defenses, not that they don't overlap, but they're concentrating on the missile launchers, the air defenses, and maybe some government buildings that are associated with the Revolutionary Guard. I think Israel has a checklist of all the people it wants out. And it has better intelligence on the ground than we do. And I think they are the ones that are going down that checklist. The conventional wisdom is that if you go to war, especially in the Middle East, and you want to change the regime, you have to be on the ground. I don't quite think that all the examples quite fit that. In the 91 war, 91 first Gulf War, we were on the ground. We had a huge coalition. We had almost a million there, and we didn't change the regime. So it's always a political matter. In 2011, Barack Obama started bombing Libya with the French and the British. They did remove the regime, but they weren't there to usher in a replacement, so you had tribal warfare. And of course, Hakeem Jeffries just embarrassed himself when he said that, you needed a war powers resolution to conduct war, and the Democrats would insist on that. And of course, that's not what Obama did. And then he said, well, it was very temporary. No, it wasn't very temporary. He bombed, I think the last day in office in 2017, in January, he bombed a camp in Libya. He was bombing. So can you remove a regime? I think you can remove it. I think the point is not that you can't remove a regime, but it's hard to remove and then replace it with something you want. We had to go in on the ground with Maduro. So we'll see. And the $64,000 question is there anybody on the ground? Somebody's on the ground because I know the Israelis have tapped into their traffic cameras, they've tapped into their communications, but they have Mossad people all over that country. And the United States probably does too. We have a lot of Iranian expatriates here in the country. So I don't know what the plan is as far as there is a rough division of labor. The United States is going after all of the air defenses, not that they don't overlap, but they're concentrating on the missile launchers, the air defenses, and maybe some government buildings that are associated with the Revolutionary Guard. I think Israel has a checklist of all the people it wants out. And it has better intelligence on the ground than we do. And I think they are the ones that are going down that checklist. And I think the point they're trying to make, and whether they have us do it or not, that's their emphasis. And I think what they're trying to do is say to the Iranians, anybody who takes over that has theocratic credentials is going to be dead. So you can announce that you're the next Khomeini, or you can announce you're the next Ayatollah, or you're the next whatever president. But it's funny, they haven't gone after the president. There's certain people they don't go after, and that sends a dual message. It says if you're going to moderate and you might want to be a transitional figure, you're not going to get killed. And they're not really going after the officers anymore of the Iranian army that don't have theocratic connections. So we'll see. And the people can't go out yet because there's an active war. So the $64,000 question, use that phrase again, is when they say, we're going to take a pause, will these people go out? And if they go out and the Revolutionary Guard unleashes Iraqis or Hezbollah killers, as they did last time, and themselves, will there be ground support? I don't mean from, 20,000 feet. Will they send in Apache helicopters or something to help the protesters? And then we're in a real war. The November 2026 elections will be determined fairly or not, largely on the status of the economy. The left knows that. They know two things. One, that the enormous projected gain in oil and natural gas production. Two, the deregulation and tax cuts involved in the big, beautiful bill that will kick in full in 2026, and some $10 trillion in foreign investment, even if that's maybe only half of what's promised, but that's an enormous amount, 7 or 8 times more than Biden received in his last year of office. You add all of that up, an economy right now that is doing well, and Black Friday falling for Thanksgiving had almost $11 billion in online sales. That was a record, not just better than last year at this time under the Biden administration, but better than in any time in history. So the economy is already strong, and you can imagine that these catalysts and this stimuli that are coming, deregulation, tax reduction, massive foreign investment, expelling 2 million people from the United States per year who were probably on social assistance, involved in many cases of crime. You can see what's going to happen. The economy is going to boom in 2026, and the left knows it. So what is their strategy? Don't talk about the Trump economy. And we've seen what? Go after Tesla, firebomb Tesla dealerships, drive Tesla off automobiles off the road because Elon Musk is a prince of darkness and he was involved in Doge, demonize Doge. Go after ICE, have street theater, have riots, call them Gestapo, say they're worse than Hitler. Go after the National Guard that has cleaned up Washington, D.C., encouraged massive resistance. Call it illegal. Shut down the government. Shut down the government for longer than any period in history, 40 days. Shut it down for no purpose. It gained nothing. Supposedly it gained nothing. Shut it down. Have major senators on the Democratic side and representatives cut a video. Have them tell the American soldiers, all 1.3 million active duty strong, you don't have to obey an order if in your legal wisdom, your vast knowledge of jurisprudence, if you're a private, and he says, go over that hill, I don't have to do it, it's illegal. Create disruption. And the piece of resistance, the Epstein files. You have the Epstein files for 4 years under Joe Biden, Democrats. You knew that Donald Trump expelled him from his circle of friends before he was convicted of anything. But there are about 80% or 90% of people in the so-called Epstein files. These are emails, these are text messages, these are transcripts from court proceedings. These may be IRS files, but 80 to 90% are Democrats. That's why it was not released during the Democratic administration. But no matter, just say Epstein files, Epstein files, Epstein files, Epstein file.
Too many coincidences to be accidental. Too much loss to call it an experiment. Let's be honest. There's a plan. The only question is, whose?
So Donald Trump finally says, okay, they're released. And what do we hear? Crickets. Maybe a little bit about Larry Summers, Democrat, but silence. Why doesn't the left demand that every single name be released? Because they have more Democratic donors than Trump has Republican donors that are mentioning it. So the Epstein files, like the shutdown, like the street theater, like all the videos, like all the smutty language, they were designed for one point, one reason, one goal. Keep your mind off the economy. Create a word called affordability. The real message is we Democrats raised prices by 21% when we were in power, 5.2% per year. We had enormous budget deficits. We ran the debt up by $8 trillion. We had a $1.1 trillion deficit. Don't talk about that. Just say that Donald Trump in 10 months has a 3% inflation rate, the same as when he entered office. And therefore, he's responsible for the 21% that we ran up, and we'll call it affordability. My message to the Trump administration and all of you listening is tune out all of the street theater, all the pornography, all the smutty language, all the insurrectionary activity, and just focus on the economy and talk 2 points. 2 points. How much better it is already than the average of the 4 years prior, but more importantly, demonstrate why it's going to be booming in 2026 and why the Democrats don't want you to think about that. Rather, that term loosely refers to a corpus of hundreds, if not thousands, of text messages, emails, phone records between Jeffrey Epstein and hundreds of people. And because that he was a spider-like person that had a web of entrapment and gave lavishly, and I would say at the outset, 90% of the monies that Jeffrey Epstein gave to that had a political affiliation were Democratic and left, not Republican. Get that straight right now. So he was everywhere trying to buy influence, and one of the ways he bought influence was apparently in his various domains. He had underage, attractive girls that he trafficked and manipulated, and his modus operandi was to get powerful figures to come in under the auspices of discussing statecraft, politics, great donations he would go to, and then they would succumb to these temptations of pedophilia, supposedly, unlawfully so, and he would have cameras and document that, and then the subtext was they would be bribed, and he would offer to manage their financial affairs, or for a small donation to him, then he would keep that secret. And he used that to gain influence and money. And when at his death, he was probably worth $500 million. And so now people want to find out who was included in those communications. But here's the problem. Everybody says, Donald Trump, we're going to get Donald Trump. He doesn't want to release it. He doesn't want to release it. But it doesn't quite make sense, because the trove was under the jurisdiction of the Joe Biden Department of Justice under Merrick Garland. They had them for 4 years. Do you really believe that if they had something on Donald Trump, who admittedly knew Jeffrey Epstein as a 1980s, 1990s celebrity in Manhattan, everybody seemed to know him, but if they had something incriminating, they leaked almost everything about Donald Trump. Remember, they raided his home to get what? Just a few classified documents, 102 out of 14,000 papers. They raided they tried 25 states, tried to get him off the ballot. He was the object of 91 felony charges in 5 different jurisdictions, civil and criminal. You think if they're going to go to the impeach twice during the first term, if they're going to go to that effort, and they had incriminating evidence in this, they wouldn't have leaked it. So they kept it quiet. And then when Donald Trump became president, he had it under lock and key, and there were rumors that Pam Bondi or Kash Patel were going to release it, and he didn't. And there's 2 schools of thought why he didn't. The first is that he thought that it was a distraction from his economic, and it is. I mean, he had a better economic record than Joe Biden. He didn't have 5.2% on average every single year, but people were talking about the Epstein files. And so he just wanted to get it out of mind and not visit it. It had the opposite effect. By suppressing it, people became more curious. And of course, there was the charge from the left that he suppressed it because he would be incriminated. There would be a direct reference that he was involved. But we have just the opposite. What files or communications that have leaked out suggest that even some of the young girls knew that Donald Trump was not engaging in the type of activity that others were. So what was the other reason? Why didn't he release it then? He was innocent. He didn't, if it wasn't a matter of distracting from his economic, was there another reason? Probably, maybe the same reason that Joe Biden didn't leak it, that there were prominent donors or officials that were either Republican or Democrat who just didn't want to be embarrassed. Well, how would that function? Somebody might call up President Trump. This is Mr. Smith. Jeffrey Epstein came over to my home twice. I visited his home. We were discussing a large gift I was going to give to Harvard University. But my name came up, and without context, if my name is released, I will be incriminated because he is toxic. That could happen. So there's all sorts of explanation. There is even a 4th or 5th dimensional chess explanation. I'll throw it out there. In other words, Donald Trump knew that he was not in those files, but he had heard before he became president for a second time during his first term, or he had seen in the first months of his office that 90% of the references of fundraising and money and associates, to the degree they were political, involved Democrats. He also knew that unlike himself, who had ostracized Jeffrey Epstein before he was convicted of trafficking and sexual crimes, that is, before he was a de facto pedophile, he had distanced himself and others had not. So in this kind of strange explanation or exegesis, Donald Trump then just let this sit like hot water on a kettle and simmer and simmer and simmer. So then the Democrats would overreach, say, get it out, get it out, get it out. And he thought, they didn't get it out because they are incriminated, and now they've leaked all they can about me. And unlike me, a lot of these people were involved after Jeffrey Epstein was convicted of a sexual crime, and I'm just going to let them demand and clamor until an opportune moment I will release it. I'm not sure I believe this exegesis, but that is what has been commonly alleged more recently. And lo and behold, they're starting to release the Epstein files, and Democratic luminaries like Larry Summers, former Secretary of the Treasury, former president of Harvard, you can't get much more elite and renowned than that, has already distanced himself from his Harvard former employer and Democratic grandees because he is mentioned in the Epstein files as asking for advice how to, I guess you would call it, he says, get horizontal or bed a young woman. I don't know of what age. So in this case, they are going to release the files, and there is going to be Democratic names in those files and liberal names in those files, and their names will occur in context, not before private citizen Epstein was charged with anything, but after they had to know that he was a convicted sex criminal, and after he was convicted of that, they continued these relations of some sort of nefarious activity as alleged. And we're going to watch this. If that were to be true, then Donald Trump put a big noose out there. The Democrats unwisely put their head in it, screamed and yelled that Donald Trump was guilty, and then he pulled the lever, so to speak, and they've hung themselves. We'll see, but it's a sordid business all the way around.